They were already seated when I arrived. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the chandelier, not the crystal glasses, not the soft clink of cutlery against porcelain. Just the fact that every chair around that long walnut table was occupied except one. Mine. The invitation had said 7 o'clock sharp. I arrived at 6:58, coat buttoned gift, tucked under my arm, heart thudding the way it used to before parent-teacher conferences. Yet, there they were. My children. My grandchildren. My husband's siblings. All settled. All mid-conversation. As if the night had begun without me. I stood there just inside the dining room of my own house holding a pie I had baked from scratch that afternoon. Pecan. Harold's favorite. Or it had been before he passed, and before his children decided my presence was optional. No one looked up right away. That was the injustice. Not shouting, not cruelty, silence. Then my oldest son, Mark, glanced over. His smile flickered tight and quick, the kind you give a cashier you do not plan to see again. "Oh, you made it." Made it. As if I were a guest. As if this house had not been paid for with 30 years of my bookkeeping salary. My skipped vacations, my careful saving while Harold chased his business dreams and my children chased theirs. "I said I would," I replied. My voice sounded calm. It surprised me. My daughter Ellen cleared her throat. "Mom, we thought you might be tired. Long drive and all." The drive was 20 minutes. I looked at the empty chair at the end of the table. No place setting, no napkin, no glass. Just bare wood. "I'll just grab a plate," I said, turning toward the kitchen. Mark stood abruptly. "Actually," he said, raising his voice just enough to command the room. "We were hoping to talk first." Before dinner, the room stilled. Forks paused. A grandchild kicked her legs under the table, sensing tension she did not yet understand. I set the pie down slowly on the sideboard. My hands were steady, but my chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out without anesthesia. "Talk about what I asked." Ellen exchanged a glance with her husband. Then she said it, casually, as if she were discussing the weather. "The house. We think it's time." Time. Such a small word. Such a heavy blade. "This house is too much for you," Mark added. "Too big. Too many stairs. We've been talking and it just makes sense to sell it. Downsize you. Put the money somewhere safe." Somewhere safe. They meant somewhere they could access. I looked around the table at the faces I had fed, clothed, defended. Faces that now watched me like a problem to be solved. Not one of them asked what I wanted. "I'm not selling my house," I said. Mark's jaw tightened. "Mom, don't be difficult." There it was, the first cut. I felt the old reflex rise in me. The instinct to soften, to placate, to explain myself into smaller and smaller pieces until everyone else was comfortable. I had done that my entire life. With Harold. With the kids. With bosses who paid me less because I did not complain. But something inside me had shifted when I saw that empty chair. "This is not a discussion," Ellen said gently, which somehow made it worse. "We're just trying to help." "Help," I smiled then. Not because I felt warm, but because I felt cold clarity settle into my bones. "You're trying to decide," I said slowly without me. Mark sighed, rubbing his temple. "We're thinking long-term. Estate planning, inheritance, you know, practical things." Inheritance. That word echoed in my head like a door slamming shut. I thought of the will in my desk drawer. The one I had rewritten quietly after Harold's funeral. The one none of them knew about. The one my lawyer, Mrs. Langley, had looked over twice and called airtight. I thought of the business I had quietly built after my children stopped calling unless they needed something. The consulting firm they did not know I owned. The accounts they had never asked about because they assumed there was nothing worth asking. I thought of the power they believed I did not have. I think I said, meeting Mark's eyes, that dinner is getting cold. No one moved. Finally, Ellen shrugged. "Suit yourself, but we'll come back to this." They did not offer me a chair. I went to the kitchen alone and fixed myself a plate. The food tasted like nothing. Laughter drifted in from the dining room, already moving on, already erasing the moment as if it had never happened. That night after they left, I stood in the quiet house and picked up the empty place setting I had prepared out of habit. I carried it to the sink and set it down carefully. That was when I realized something. They had not come for dinner. They had come for what they thought was theirs, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was angry, but because my mind was finally awake. There is a difference. Anger burns hot and fast. Awakening is colder, sharper. It rearranges things. I lay in bed listening to the house settle every familiar creak and sigh, reminding me how long I had lived within these walls. How much of myself I had folded into its corners. How easily my children had discussed selling it as if it were already gone. By morning, I had made a decision, not a dramatic one, not revenge yet. Something quieter. I was going to stop assuming they knew who I was. After breakfast, I pulled the leather folder from the back of my closet, the one wrapped in an old scarf to keep it from gathering dust. Inside were documents my children had never seen. Incorporation papers, bank statements, contracts, the result of 15 years of careful work after Harold died and left me with more bills than sympathy. Back then, everyone had assumed I would struggle. I let them. I took a sip of coffee and dialed Mrs. Langley. "Good morning, Margaret," she said. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I want to review everything," I replied. "The will, the trust, all of it." There was a pause. Then did something happen? "Yes," I said simply. And it confirmed what I already suspected. An hour later, I was sitting across from her in her office sunlight, slanting across shelves of legal volumes. She listened without interrupting as I told her about the dinner. The missing chair. The word inheritance, spoken like a claim already filed. When I finished, she folded her hands. "They believe you are vulnerable," I nodded. "They believe I am finished." She smiled thin and knowing. "And are you—" I thought of the clients who called me every week for advice. The contracts waiting for renewal. The account balances my children had never bothered to ask about. "No," I said, "I am not." We spent the next 2 hours going over details. Adjusting language. Clarifying clauses. Ensuring there was no room for interpretation. No soft edges for manipulation. By the time I left her office, my name felt heavier in my chest, more solid. On the drive home, my phone rang. "Mark." "Mom," he said, as if nothing had happened. "We should talk again. Clear the air." I gripped the steering wheel. "There's nothing unclear." He exhaled sharply. "You're being emotional." That old word, the one used to dismiss, to minimize, to claim superiority without evidence. "I am being precise," I replied. "There's a difference." He fell silent. "I won't be discussing my home or my finances at family dinners," I continued. "Or anywhere else. If you have legal questions, you can speak to my lawyer." "You hired a lawyer?" he asked, incredulous. "I've had one for years," I said. "You just never noticed." I hung up before he could respond. That afternoon, I did something I had not done in decades. I rearranged the furniture in the living room. Not because it was necessary, but because I could. I moved the armchair from the corner into the light. I took down the family portrait that always made me feel like an afterthought and replaced it with a painting I bought myself last year. When Ellen texted later asking if I was upset, I did not answer. Because this was not about hurt feelings. It was about control. And for the first time in a long while, I could feel it shifting back into my hands. They thought the story was about inheritance. They were wrong. It was about power, and I had only just begun to reclaim it. If you're still with me, stay. Because what came next was not loud, not cruel, but it was irreversible. The first thing I did was nothing. That confused them. A week passed, then 2. No dramatic phone calls, no family meeting, no emotional outbursts. I still hosted Sunday coffee for neighbors. I still volunteered at the Historical Society on Wednesdays. From the outside, I looked unchanged, harmless, predictable. Inside, I was building something else. It started with paperwork. Quiet mornings at my dining table, sunlight slanting across spreadsheets and legal folders while the kettle cooled beside me. I reviewed everything I owned and everything I was owed. The consulting firm I had started under my initials so long ago that even I sometimes forgot how brave that decision had been. The retirement accounts my children assumed were thin. The insurance policies Harold never knew I kept. Most importantly, I reviewed the trust. Mrs. Langley had been thorough. The trust placed my assets beyond impulsive interference. It outlined medical authority, financial control, and inheritance in language so precise it felt like armor. My children would receive what I decided when I decided under conditions I alone set. Conditions. That word lingered with me. On the 3rd week after the dinner, Ellen showed up unannounced. I watched her car pull into the driveway from the front window. She sat inside for a moment, fixing her hair in the mirror, rehearsing. I did not rush to open the door. When I finally did, she smiled too quickly. "Hi, Mom. I was in the area." She never came by without a reason. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured tea. She declined sugar as if we were strangers negotiating politeness. "I've been worried about you," she began. "You seemed distant." "I've been busy," I replied. She glanced around the kitchen, taking inventory. The clean counters, the new chair cushion I'd bought myself, the absence of clutter she associated with decline. "You know," she said carefully, "Mark and I just want to make sure everything is set, in case of emergencies. Emergencies, another word with sharp edges. I am set, I said. She leaned forward. Mom, if something happened to you tomorrow, we wouldn't even know where things stand. That's intentional, I said calmly. Her eyes widened. What? I've noticed, I continued, that when people know too much about your affairs, they start making plans that don't include you. Her mouth opened, then closed. Are you accusing us of something? She asked, wounded. I'm observing, I said. There's a difference. She stood abruptly. This isn't like you. No, I agreed. It isn't. She left shortly after, frustrated and unsettled. As her car disappeared down the street, my phone buzzed. A message from Mark. We need to talk. You're making things difficult. I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down. That night, I opened a new folder on my computer and titled it Contingency. Inside, I began documenting everything. Every interaction, every message, every attempt to pressure or manipulate. Dates, times, words used, not for revenge. For record, because women like me learn too late that memory is dismissed, but documentation is respected. The following week, I made another move. I scheduled a medical evaluation, full cognitive assessment, voluntary, thorough. I wanted a paper trail proving what my children whispered about only behind closed doors. The doctor smiled when I scored well above average. You're sharp, he said. I know, I replied. I just needed proof. When the report arrived, I placed it in the trust folder. Then I waited. The call came on a Friday evening. Mark's voice was tight. We've been talking to someone about guardianship. The word landed like a slap. Who? I asked. A lawyer friend, he said quickly. Just hypothetically. Hypothetically. I closed my eyes. I see, I said. Then you should know I've already spoken to mine. Extensively. Silence. And I added, any attempt to declare me incompetent without medical basis will trigger immediate consequences. What consequences? He snapped. You'll find out, I said. I hung up and felt my hands shake for the first time since the dinner. They were escalating, which meant I had been right, and now it was time to stop being quiet. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail. I recognized Mark's handwriting on the envelope before I even opened it. Careful, controlled. The handwriting of someone trying to appear reasonable while doing something deeply unreasonable. Inside was a formal notice. They were requesting a family meeting with a mediator. The purpose stated was concern for my well-being and financial decision-making. There were phrases highlighted. Capacity, protection, shared responsibility. I sat at the table for a long time, the paper resting between my hands like something alive. This was no longer about the house. This was about control. I did not call Mark. I did not call Ellen. I called Mrs. Langley. Good, she said after reading the letter aloud. This helps. Helps, I asked. Yes, she replied. It establishes intent. We met that afternoon. She laid out the strategy with the calm precision of someone who had seen families implode before. You will agree to the meeting, she said, on your terms. My stomach tightened. Why? Because refusing makes you look defensive, she explained. Agreeing makes you look confident. Confidence, another word I had not worn in years, but it fit surprisingly well. The meeting was scheduled for the following week in a neutral office downtown. A conference room with glass walls and a long table. Of course, I arrived early. When Mark and Ellen walked in together, I noticed how they sat side by side, united, rehearsed. Ellen avoided my eyes. Mark offered a tight nod. The mediator began with gentle words about family harmony. Then Mark spoke. We're concerned Mom may not fully understand the long-term implications of her choices, he said, folding his hands. She's isolating herself, making unusual decisions. Like what the mediator asked, Mark gestured vaguely. Refusing help, hiring lawyers, restructuring assets. I smiled. May I asked? The mediator nodded. I hired a lawyer because I'm competent, I said. I restructured my assets because they're mine. And I refused help because it wasn't help. It was a takeover. Ellen gasped softly. Mom, that's unfair. Is it? I asked. Tell me which part. Silence. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of my medical evaluations, financial statements, and trust documents. Neatly tabbed. Thorough. The mediator scanned them, eyebrows lifting. I am of sound mind, I continued. I am financially independent, and I am not obligated to disclose my affairs to anyone who discusses my inheritance while I'm still alive. Mark's face reddened. You're twisting this. No, I said quietly. You tried to remove me from my own life. The mediator cleared her throat. Based on this documentation, there is no basis for guardianship. Ellen's eyes filled with tears. We were just trying to protect you. From what I asked. From my own autonomy. They did not answer. The meeting ended shortly after. As I stood to leave, Mark said sharply, You didn't have to embarrass us. I paused at the door. You embarrassed yourselves, I said. I just stopped covering for you. Outside the air felt different. Lighter, as if I had stepped out of a room that had been slowly suffocating me for years. But as I drove home, my phone buzzed again. A message from a number I did not recognize. "You think this is over? It isn't." I pulled over to the side of the road and stared at the screen, because now I understood. They were not going to let go quietly, and neither was I. The message sat on my phone like a bruise you keep pressing just to confirm it hurts. "You think this is over? It isn't." I did not reply. I had learned that silence when chosen deliberately unsettles people far more than argument. Instead, I drove home parked in my driveway and sat there for a full minute with my hands resting on the steering wheel. Not shaking. Grounded. They wanted a reaction. What they did not understand was that I had already passed the point of reacting. That evening I cooked dinner for one. Roasted chicken lemon and thyme, nothing extravagant. I ate slowly at the kitchen table, no television, no radio, just the sound of my fork and my own breathing. It felt ceremonial, like closing a chapter. The next move did not come from them. It came from someone I had not expected. My sister-in-law, Ruth, Harold's younger sister, had always hovered on the edges of family gatherings. Polite, observant, the kind of woman people underestimated because she spoke softly and rarely interrupted. She called me the following morning. "I heard about the meeting," she said. I stiffened. "From whom?" Ellen Ruth replied. "She was upset. Said you humiliated them." I exhaled slowly. Did she mention why there was a meeting in the first place? There was a pause. No, I thought not. Ruth sighed. "Margaret, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "Are you afraid?" I considered the question. "No," I said. "I'm alert." "That's what I thought," Ruth replied. "Listen carefully. Mark has been talking, not just to Ellen, to cousins, to old family friends, framing a story." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What kind of story? That you're stubborn. That grief has made you paranoid. That you're pushing everyone away." I closed my eyes. Gaslighting. Not the dramatic kind. The slow, social kind. The kind that erodes your credibility one whispered conversation at a time. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I'm not done," Ruth continued. "He also mentioned the will. Or rather what he assumes is in it. That did it." I laughed. Not softly, out loud. "That's bold," I said. Ruth hesitated. "Margaret, how secure are you?" "I'm very secure," I replied. "More than he knows." "Good," she said quietly. "Because he's counting on you folding." After we hung up, I walked into my study and opened the contingency folder again. I added a new section labeled Witnesses. Then I made a list of names. Ruth, 2 neighbors, a former colleague, people who had known me for decades, people who could testify if needed to my clarity, consistency, and independence. Then I made another call, not to my lawyer, to my accountant. By the end of the week, every account had an added layer of authorization, dual verification, delayed withdrawals, structures that required my explicit consent and time. If they wanted to rush me, they were going to be disappointed. On Sunday, Mark showed up again. This time he did not knock. He rang the bell twice hard. I opened the door and did not invite him in. "We need to talk," he said, jaw tight. "Then talk," I replied. He glanced past me into the house. "Can I come in?" "No." His nostrils flared. "You're doing this on purpose." "I'm setting boundaries," I said. "You're unfamiliar with them." His voice dropped. "You're tearing this family apart." I met his eyes. "You did that the moment you tried to remove my autonomy." "You're acting like an enemy," he snapped. "No," I said calmly. "I'm acting like an adult." He leaned closer. "If you don't cooperate, things will get ugly." I smiled then, not warmly. "They already are," I said. "For you." He left without another word. That night I slept deeply for the first time in weeks, because fear thrives in uncertainty, and I was done being uncertain. The first formal strike came disguised as concern. A letter from a law firm I did not recognize arrived on cream-colored paper. Polite language. Carefully neutral. It stated that they represented interested parties wishing to ensure my assets were being managed responsibly. They requested a review of my financial decisions and suggested an independent evaluation. Interested parties. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. I forwarded the letter to Mrs. Langley and added a single sentence. "They've escalated." Her reply came within minutes. "As expected. We'll respond formally. Do not engage." I followed her advice. I did not call Mark. I did not warn Ellen. I did not explain myself to anyone. Instead, I went about my life. That was the part that unnerved them the most. I attended my volunteer shift. I hosted book club. I went grocery shopping and chatted with the cashier about the weather. I looked by all appearances like a woman unconcerned. Behind the scenes, however, I was preparing something else. At Mrs. Langley's suggestion, I scheduled a meeting with a private fiduciary firm. Independent, reputable, female-led. They reviewed my assets, my trust, my intentions. At the end of the meeting, the director smiled. You're one of the most organized clients we've seen. I've had practice, I said. They agreed to act as an added layer of oversight. Not because I needed help, but because it removed ammunition from anyone claiming I did. Control through transparency. That was the irony. The more I documented, the less power my children had. Then came the unexpected twist. Ellen called me late one evening. Not angry, not defensive. Tired. Mom, she said quietly. Mark is pushing this too far. I remained silent. He's talking about court, she continued. About forcing things. And what do you think I asked? She hesitated. I think he's afraid. Of what I asked? Of losing, she admitted. I closed my eyes. Ellen, I said gently. This was never a competition until he made it one. She swallowed. What do you want? It was a simple question, one she had not asked me in years. I want peace, I said, and distance from anyone who confuses control with love. Another pause. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. You don't, I replied. You decide which side of it you're on. The line went quiet. When we hung up, I knew something had shifted. Cracks were forming, and cracks once visible spread. Mark was losing allies. He just didn't know it yet. And what he still did not understand was this. I was not fighting to win. I was fighting to end the war on my own terms. And in the next chapter, he would make the mistake that sealed everything. The mistake Mark made was assuming I would protect him. I had always done it before. Smoothed things over. Made excuses. Explained away his sharp edges to relatives and friends. Mark is under pressure. Mark means well. Mark doesn't show emotion the way others do. I had been his quiet shield for decades, absorbing the impact of his behavior so he could move through the world unchallenged. So when he decided to move forward without my consent, he assumed I would still soften the fallout. He was wrong. I found out on a Thursday afternoon, not through him, but through Ruth again. Her voice was tight when she called. He filed, she said. My stomach did not drop. It steadied. Filed what I asked? A petition, she replied. Emergency financial oversight. He's claiming undue influence, that someone is manipulating you. I closed my eyes slowly. And who is this someone? Ruth let out a dry laugh. He didn't name anyone, which is worse. Of course he didn't. Naming someone would invite scrutiny. Vagueness created suspicion without accountability. It was a classic maneuver. One I would have respected once when I still believed Mark operated in good faith. Thank you, I said. I'll handle it. After we hung up, I did not panic. I did not cry. I opened my laptop and called Mrs. Langley. She was already aware. He moved faster than expected, she said. But he's sloppy. Explain, I replied. He filed without evidence, she continued. No medical reports, no financial irregularities, no witness affidavits. He's relying on narrative. Narrative. The word echoed in my mind. Because for years, Mark had controlled the narrative. The successful son. The responsible one. The one who knew best. And I had allowed it. Then we counter, I said. Yes, she replied, but strategically. By the end of the day, we had filed our response. Calm. Thorough. Backed by documentation so clean it was almost elegant. Independent evaluations. Fiduciary oversight. Witness statements attesting to my competence and autonomy. We did not attack him. We let the facts speak. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Emergency petitions always were. Mark wanted urgency. Pressure. A sense that time was running out for me. He misjudged one thing. I had all the time in the world. The night before the hearing, Ellen called again. This time she was crying. He didn't tell me he was filing, she said. I swear. I found out after. I listened. He says you're being manipulated, she continued. That you've changed. I have, I said softly. That part is true, she sobbed. He says you're trying to punish him. I closed my eyes. No, Ellen. I'm trying to survive him. She went quiet. I need you to understand something. I continued. Tomorrow isn't about winning. It's about stopping this from ever happening again. What do you want me to do? She asked. Nothing, I replied. Just don't lie for him. She did not answer right away. I won't, she said finally. That was enough. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. Plain walls, fluorescent lighting, a long table that reminded me of school conferences long ago. Mark sat across from me in a crisp suit, jaw set, eyes avoiding mine. When the judge entered the room, stilled, Mark's attorney spoke first. He painted a picture. A concerned son, an aging mother, uncharacteristic behavior, isolation, risk. Then Mrs. Langley stood. She did not raise her voice. She laid out the timeline, the documentation, the evaluations, the safeguards I had voluntarily put in place. She spoke of my career, my financial literacy, my consistent decision-making. Then she said the sentence that shifted the room. This petition was filed not to protect my client, she said, but to override her. The judge looked at Mark. Do you have evidence of incapacity? She asked. Mark's attorney hesitated. No, he admitted, not at this time. The judge nodded once. Petition denied, she said. And I advise all parties to tread carefully going forward. Mark's face drained of color. I did not look at him as we stood, because it was not over, but the ground had cracked. Mark did not speak to me after the hearing. That silence was not peace, it was recalculation. I felt it in the days that followed, in the way mutual acquaintances suddenly reached out casual questions wrapped in false concern. How are you holding up? This must be stressful. Families can be complicated, I answered politely and briefly. I did not explain. I did not defend myself. I let the truth stand on its own. Ellen came by a week later, alone. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but emotionally. As if something heavy had finally shifted off her shoulders and left a hollow behind. I didn't know how bad it was, she said, sitting at the kitchen table where so many conversations had died. You knew enough, I replied gently. She nodded. I just didn't want to see it. I understand, I said. I raised you not to look for monsters in familiar faces. She swallowed. He's furious, she admitted. He says you humiliated him, that you turned everyone against him. I sipped my tea. I didn't turn anyone. I stopped lying. That landed. He wants to appeal, she said quietly. I looked at her then. He can't. She frowned. Why not? Because the judge made something clear, I said. Any further attempts without evidence would be seen as harassment. Her eyes widened. So what happens now? I leaned back in my chair. Now I said he chooses. That was the moment Ellen finally understood. Mark had lost the ability to control me. What remained was his decision about how far he was willing to go to preserve his pride. 2 days later, I received an email from Mark. No greeting, no warmth. He wanted to meet. Alone. I forwarded it to Mrs. Langley. Her response was immediate. Only if conditions are set. We agreed to a public place. A quiet restaurant during lunch hours. Neutral ground. No ambushes. No raised voices. When Mark arrived, he looked older. Not aged, but worn. His confidence had fractures now. Hair slightly unkempt. Suit less precise. He sat across from me and did not order. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Yes, I replied. I did. He clenched his jaw. You made me look like a villain. You made yourself one, I said calmly. I just stopped editing. He stared at the table. I was trying to protect what's ours. There is no ours, I said. Not anymore. That made him look up. You're cutting us out, he accused. I'm redefining access, I corrected. He leaned forward. You think this ends well for you? I met his gaze without flinching. It already has. That was when I saw it. Not anger. Fear. He had lost his leverage. And men like Mark, who mistake authority for love, do not handle that loss quietly. As we stood to leave, he said one last thing. You'll regret this. I smiled not cruelly. No, I said. I finally won't. As I walked out into the afternoon light, I felt something unfamiliar and profound. Relief. Because the revenge was no longer coming. It had already begun. Regret is a funny thing. People like Mark use it as a threat because they have lived their lives avoiding it at all costs. They assume everyone else is just as afraid. They forget that some of us have already survived worse. The morning after our lunch meeting, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. Not relief, exactly. Resolution. Like a door had closed behind me, not slammed, just clicked shut with finality. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching a pair of sparrows argue over the bird feeder. Life went on. That mattered more than Mark's last words. By noon, the retaliation began. Not directly. Mark was smarter than that. Instead, he worked through reputation. I learned later that he had contacted extended family members framing the court denial as a misunderstanding caused by my lawyer being overly aggressive. He told them I had become unreachable, cold, unlike myself. Unlike myself? That phrase followed me all week. At first it stung, then it clarified something I had been circling for years. They did not want me to be myself. They wanted me to remain useful. The shift became visible at a family birthday party for one of my nieces. I almost didn't go. Almost. But something in me wanted to see it with open eyes. The room quieted slightly when I entered. Conversations softened. Smiles stiffened. Ruth hugged me first, solid, unapologetic. Glad you came, she whispered. Others followed more cautiously, polite, careful, as if I were fragile glass. Mark was there. Across the room. He did not approach. Halfway through the party, a cousin pulled me aside. I heard things are tense, she said gently. Mark's worried about you. I met her gaze. Mark tried to take control of my finances and failed. Her eyes widened. He said, I know what he said. I interrupted calmly. I'm telling you what he did. She studied my face, searching for confusion, weakness, instability. She found none. I'm sorry, she said quietly. That was the first crack in his narrative. It spread faster than he expected. People began asking him questions he could not answer without admitting too much. Why file without evidence? Why not talk first? Why assume incompetence instead of disagreement? Mark had always thrived when people took him at his word. Now they were listening to mine. 3 days later, Ellen called. "He's furious," she said. "He says you're poisoning people against him." "I haven't spoken to most of them," I replied. "That's what scares him," she admitted. "You're not trying to convince anyone." I smiled slightly. "The truth doesn't need persuasion." She hesitated. "He's considering another move." "What kind?" I asked. "Financial," she said. "He's trying to pressure you indirectly, through the family business." That got my attention. The family business had been Harold's pride, a modest logistics company Mark had taken over years ago. I still held a minority stake, one I had never interfered with. Until now. I called my accountant that afternoon. "Review my position," I said, quietly. By evening I had the answer. Mark had been drawing against future earnings aggressively, leveraging optimism. Risky optimism. If I pulled my support, the structure would wobble. Not collapse, not immediately, but wobble was enough. That night I drafted a single letter. Not emotional, not accusatory, professional. It stated my intention to step back from silent support and require full transparency moving forward. I sent it certified. When Mark called the next morning, his voice was sharp. "You're sabotaging me." "I'm protecting myself," I replied. "You know what this does to cash flow," he snapped. "Yes," I said. "That's why I did it." He went quiet. "You taught me something?" I continued. "When someone has power over you, they expect you to flinch." I stopped flinching. He hung up. The war had moved into open territory, and for the first time I was not outnumbered. The fallout was not immediate. It never is when pride is involved. Mark tried to hold things together. He reassured partners, smoothed conversations, promised growth that required time he no longer controlled. Meanwhile, I did nothing dramatic. I attended my yoga class. I met Ruth for lunch. I spent a Saturday afternoon reorganizing my study, donating old files, and keeping only what mattered. That was when I found it. A box I had not opened in years, labeled in my own handwriting. Personal. Inside were old documents, notes, early correspondence from Harold's business days, including one contract that made my breath hitch. A loan agreement, not between Mark and a bank, between Mark and me. I remembered it suddenly. Years ago, when he took over the company, cash was tight. He had come to me late one night, proud but desperate. I had lent him the money quietly. No interest, no deadline, just trust. The contract was simple, informal, but legally binding, and unpaid. I sat there for a long time, the paper resting in my hands, feeling the weight of irony settle over me. He had accused me of being manipulated. All the while standing on debt he hoped I had forgotten. I had not. I called Mrs. Langley. "You have leverage," she said, after reviewing the document. "Significant." "I don't want to destroy him," I replied. She paused. "Do you want him to stop?" "Yes," I said. "Then you use it," she said gently. "Not as punishment, as consequence." We drafted a notice, formal, clear, requesting acknowledgement of the loan and a repayment plan. Reasonable, structured. When Mark received it, he did not call. He showed up. This time he knocked. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. He looked around the house like a man seeing it for the first time, or perhaps realizing it no longer belonged to him, even in theory. "You planned this," he said. "No," I replied. "I prepared for it." "You're cornering me," he accused. "I'm asking you to stand where you put me," I said. His face tightened. "If you push this, the company could suffer." I met his eyes. "Then you should have thought about that before you tried to take my autonomy." Silence stretched between us. "This loan," he said, finally, voice low. "You never mentioned it." "I never had to," I replied. "You were paying in respect, until you stopped." That landed harder than anything else I had said. He sank into a chair. For the first time, Mark looked like a man forced to see the full shape of his choices. "I didn't think you'd fight back," he admitted. "I know," I said. "That's why this happened." He looked up. "What do you want?" I considered the question carefully. "I want acknowledgement," I said. "Not apologies, accountability, and distance." He swallowed. "And if I refuse?" "Then I enforce the agreement," I replied calmly. "And the court will do what you tried to." That was the moment his confidence finally broke. Not shattered, cracked. He nodded slowly. "I'll cooperate." As he left, I felt no triumph, just a quiet certainty. The balance had shifted, and in the next chapter, the cost of everything he had done would come due in ways he never anticipated. Consequences do not arrive all at once. They seep. Mark kept his word. At least on paper. Within a week, his attorney sent over a proposed repayment schedule for the loan. Conservative. Careful. Designed to reassure partners without exposing how precarious things had become. I reviewed it with Mrs. Langley, made a few adjustments, and approved it. That should have been the end. It wasn't. Because once power shifts, people begin to notice things they used to ignore. The first sign came from the board. 2 members requested a private meeting with Mark. They asked questions he had never had to answer before. About debt, about governance, about family entanglements he had always waved away with a smile and a story. Then a longtime client delayed a contract renewal. Not cancelled. Delayed. The polite kind of doubt that says we are watching you now. Mark called Ellen late one night. She told me later his voice sounded hollow. "They don't trust me the way they used to," he said. "They're finally seeing you clearly," she replied. That hurt him more than any legal document. For years, Mark had relied on a particular kind of immunity. The son of a steady mother, the man from a good family, the one whose rough edges were always explained away. When that narrative fractured, it took his certainty with it. He came to see me again, unannounced but quieter this time. "I didn't know it would unravel like this," he said, standing in my doorway. "I did," I replied, "because I held it together for you." He looked past me into the house. "You could help? Smooth things over?" There it was, the reflex. "I already helped," I said, "for decades." He flinched. "I meant now." "No," I replied. "Now you learn." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing a truth too heavy to argue with. "What happens next?" he asked. "That depends on you," I said. "You can rebuild on honesty, or you can keep blaming me for consequences you earned." He did not answer. A month later, Mark stepped down as chief executive. Officially, it was to focus on strategy. Unofficially, the board needed distance from the optics of the petition, the debt, the family conflict. Ellen told me over coffee. Her hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around her mug. "I think this broke something in him," she said. "Or revealed it," I replied. She looked at me carefully. "Do you feel guilty?" I considered the question. "No," I said. "I feel finished." That night, I walked through my house room by room, not with sadness, with intention. I boxed old papers, donated furniture, let go of objects that belonged to versions of myself that no longer existed. I wasn't running. I was choosing. I moved in the spring. Not far, just enough. A smaller house near the water with a screened porch and morning light that pooled gently across the floor. I told almost no one. Ruth knew. Ellen knew. Mark did not ask. That silence was its own answer. My days changed shape. I volunteered twice a week at the local library. I took a beginner painting class on Thursdays. I learned how quiet can feel full instead of lonely. Sometimes I thought of Mark. Not with anger, with clarity. He sent one message months later. Short, careful. He said he hoped I was well. I replied with a single sentence. "I am." That was all. On my birthday, I baked a small cake for myself. Chocolate. I lit one candle. I did not make a wish for reconciliation or recognition. I wished only to remember what I had learned. That dignity does not require permission. That love without respect is not love. That silence when chosen can be strength. I had spent years shrinking so others could stand taller. When I stopped, some of them fell. That was not revenge. That was balance. If you are listening to this and something in it feels familiar, let me leave you with this. You do not owe access to anyone who treats your autonomy like an inconvenience. You do not have to explain your boundaries to people who benefit from crossing them, and you are never too old to reclaim your life. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your word. Share your truth. And remember, the quietest endings often hold the strongest justice.